Okay, so welcome to the Financial Aid Zoom with the Scholarship Foundation, y'all. I'm Edges. If you don't know me, I know Christina Snyder. Your name looks new, so hey, girl, hey. I'm Edges, Post-Secondary Access Manager.
So my name is Teresa. I'm a student advisor at the Scholarship Foundation, and I will ask my colleagues Felipe and Robert to introduce themselves as well.
Sure, thanks, Teresa. Hi, everyone. My name is Felipe. My pronouns are they, them. I'm the immigrant student advisor at the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis. I've been at the foundation for 6 years now. I've been a student advisor for 12 years.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having us. My name is Robert Sagastume. I'm also a student advisor at the Scholarship Foundation. My pronouns are he, him, his, they, them. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I recently graduated with my master's degree in 2019, December of 2019. And I've been with the foundation for 1.5 years.
So, all right. Okay. So we're going to walk through basic financial aid stuff today. A lot of this, so Alexandria, I was just kind of giving them some information. I don't know if you're able to stay in this breakout, but if you see anything come in via the chat and you can let me know, that would be great because it's hard for me to monitor once I start sharing my screen.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. So we're just going to be talking through financial aid. I will share everything with you again afterwards so that you've got the ability to review it at your own pace again. But the reason why this conversation is important is because paying for college is a significant investment, and it's important for students and their families to understand the resources that are available to help pay for college, because college is expensive, but there are ways to pay for it, and there are ways to pay for it that will not leave you in substantial debt. And so it's a matter of understanding what those options are, and then using that information to inform your process. So I have a couple of objectives that we hope to achieve today. I want to talk a little bit about getting ready. Where are you in the process, and what are the things that you want to be thinking about, especially over the remaining weeks of your summer? We're going to talk about building your support systems. So who are the people resources in your life? How can they help you? We are, of course, going to talk about financial resources. So what kind of financial opportunities are out there to help pay for college? We are also going to talk about how colleges determine financial needs. So this is a big conversation right now for students who are headed to college in the fall, as they are asking colleges to take another look at their circumstances because of information that has changed. So it's important to understand how colleges determine financial need and create those financial aid offers, because in the event that you need to request an adjustment, it's important to know how the math was done in the first place. We will, of course, talk about scholarship resources and what are some places for you to look for those opportunities. And then I'll tell you just a very little bit about the Scholarship Foundation's loan and grant programs, but we won't spend a whole lot of time there. So, objective 1, get ready. I recognize that everyone who's on this particular breakout is a rising senior, so you are all in the same place in terms of where you are in school, but you all likely have different paths to where you are now and paths where you hope to go. So really, the first thing would be to assess where you are in the college planning process. Do you have a sense of what colleges you'd like to attend? Have you given thought to what you might want to study? Have you reconsidered things since the pandemic arrived in mid-March? Really, where are you in the college planning process, and how does that define the next steps that you have? And part of why that's important is because you want to define your timeline. It's still June. You have weeks until the fall semester of senior year of high school begins. And even though it will undoubtedly look a little bit different than you imagined it would, you have time this summer to be working on what are the next steps. And so if you know exactly what colleges you want to apply to, your timeline might look a little bit different than if you're really still in the research process and the phase of understanding what colleges are out there, who offers your major, or whatever the case may be. It's important to identify where you need help. So some students know that they're really going to need help with the financial aid process. Other students are really looking for help writing essays. Some students need help, even important, to have multiple possible plans in place. That way, if the first plan or the first choice doesn't work out for whatever the reason is, you've got the ability to quickly pivot to an alternative plan and not have to spend summer after senior year trying to implement Plan B when that wasn't what you had intended to do. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about your support system. Who are the people resources in your life who can help you navigate this process? So this first group here is family. This could be a parent or guardian, older sibling, cousin, aunt, uncle, grandparent. But ideally, your family is supportive of your decision to go to college. And for those of you who are living with a biological or adoptive parent and are likely going to need to use their information to apply for financial aid, it's important for them to understand that their financial information is going to be an important part of the financial aid application process. So family is one important resource. The second would be friends and classmates. So, we're recording this today, but you have lots of peers who were unable to make it because of their schedules, and you have classmates at your respective high schools who maybe aren't having the opportunity to participate in a summer workshop on financial aid. So you have access to this information and they may not, but similarly, they may have been able to participate in something and they have access to information that they can share with you. So the point of that is really to share information, ask your friends and classmates questions. There's a lot of sort of resource sharing that can be done between high school students, and I would encourage you to take advantage of your friends for what they know and what information they have access to. Of course, your school and college counselors, so their role may, depending on what happens with schools in the fall, their role may look a little bit different this year. In a typical year, they're going to be the ones coordinating colleges coming into your building and having conversations about their respective school. And so you want to pay attention to those opportunities from your school counselors, regardless of whether or not those opportunities happen this fall in person or virtually. But they're also going to be helpful for sending transcripts to your college. They're going to be an important resource for connecting you with local scholarships. So if your school district has scholarship opportunities for graduating high school seniors, they may be the best resource to provide those opportunities to you. So one of the recommendations that I typically make is for students to spend or to identify how their school counselors post local scholarship opportunities. That might be online, it might be in a bulletin board, or at least in the past it might have been on a bulletin board in the guidance office. And so you want to understand when and how are those opportunities posted and making sure that you're applying for them, anything that you're eligible for. This next group, this other adults, is kind of a catch-all. So it could be a sports coach or a work supervisor, someone at a place of worship, if that applies to you. These adults are oftentimes in a great position to write letters of recommendation. And letters of recommendation are important when it comes especially to competitive scholarships. So we understand from a lot of colleges that if they have a competitive scholarship they're trying to award, and there are 2 or 3 students who are very similar in terms of academics, extracurriculars, test scores, things like that, that it oftentimes comes down to the letter of recommendation as to who gets that scholarship. So think about who knows you, who's familiar with your goals and your hopes and your dreams, who can speak to your work ethic and your character. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone who is in like a position of authority or power. So if you worked really hard in a class that was difficult for you, and that teacher saw you come through that class and what steps you took to be successful, that teacher might actually be in a really great position to write that letter of recommendation because they can attest to your character and your work ethic. The next group would be college access staff. This would certainly include Wyman, but it would also include the Scholarship Foundation. So, we're just meeting for the first time via, web today. But what I can tell you is that the Scholarship Foundation and Wyman do a lot of work together, and we have worked together for many, many years. And so there are some opportunities that you may have the chance to hear about throughout your senior year, and I look forward to the chance to share that information with you. But I would really encourage you to connect with our student advisors, and we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation. And then the final group is college admissions and financial aid reps at the colleges that you're applying to. So this group is, really cannot be understated. It's a really critical resource, and I think we're seeing that play out right now with recent high school graduates, because those admissions and financial aid reps have been working closely with students for months in some cases, and now that financial circumstances are changing, or there are lots of reservations or questions or concerns, these individuals are in a position to go to bat for a student, especially if it's a student who they know really wants to come to their school. So as you are working through this process, if there's a college you really want to attend, I wouldn't shy away from reaching out in August to the admissions office and introducing yourself. And once you've filed your FAFSA in October, reaching out to financial aid and saying, hey, I've submitted my FAFSA and I just want to let you know that if there's anything else you need from me, I'm happy to send that in, or asking questions, because those relationships can make a difference down the road. All right, so we're going to start talking a little bit more about financial resources. So when you hear the term financial aid, it's really an umbrella term, and it covers 4 different kinds of buckets, if you will, that are within that umbrella term. So there are 4 types of financial aid. Typically, we talk about 2 kinds of gift aid, which would be free money that does not need to be repaid. And so gift aid would be grants and scholarships, and we'll talk more about those in a moment. And then the 3rd kind of financial aid is student loans. A lot of times students are surprised to hear that loans are considered to be financial aid, because they understand that it's a loan, it has to be repaid plus interest. But the truth is, it is considered to be financial aid, and it is increasingly one of the biggest pieces of the pie that's available to students. And so we will spend time talking about loans as well. Aid institutions, this is really true for looking at outside scholarships. So if you are on Google searching for scholarships, if you're applying on a website like My Scholarship Central, or just anything through your counseling office, there are 3 things that I would really encourage you to consider as you're doing those scholarship searches. So the first is, by and large, with very few exceptions, there should not be any cost to search for scholarships or apply for them. So if you see anything online, or you get something in the mail or via email, and it says, give me $15 and I'll give you $5,000, that sounds too good to be true, right? So please do not invest any of your resources into something without doing some research to be sure that it's legitimate. The second consideration is whether or not scholarships are renewable. So it's really important to understand whether or not the scholarships you're receiving are good for each year in college, or just for that first year. The truth of it is that senior year of high school is typically the best year to apply for and obtain scholarships. So there are 2 reasons why that's important, because one reason is that if there are scholarship opportunities that you miss applying for in your senior year of high school, you may never be able to apply for them again as a college student, because it requires that you be a high school senior to apply. The second thing is, because so many are focused on high school seniors, if you use a lot of one-time scholarship opportunities to pay for that first year in college, then you might have difficulty finding additional scholarships to replace those dollars for your 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year in college. And then the final piece is whether or not scholarships are portable. And so that essentially means if a student does their first year at UMSL and decides they'd like to transfer to SLU, can they take that scholarship, that outside scholarship, with them? A lot of outside scholarships will go with a student or will follow a student, but there might be exceptions to that. So at the Scholarship Foundation, we have one that has to be used at in-state public schools. So a student could not take it from UMSL to SLU, but they could take it from UMSL to Missouri S&T or to SEMO. So it's important to understand that, because a 1/3 of college students transfer at least once, And so it's a possibility that you may need to know whether or not your scholarship dollars will go with you. All right, so we're going to touch briefly on the FAFSA before we do a little bit of a deeper dive. So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It is more or less the gateway to paying for college. It is the central application for all federal financial aid, including grants, work, study, and loans. It is also the application that almost every state uses for their state aid programs, and Missouri is included in that. And then a lot of colleges actually use the information from the FAFSA to award institutional grant dollars as well. If for some reason you're not sure that you can file the FAFSA, or if you have questions, our team at the Scholarship Foundation can definitely help with that. The FAFSA, I really want to emphasize that first F, it is a free application. So there are folks who will try to scam students and their families online, and they will charge you to either fill it out for you or to help you fill it out. Please ask Wyman or the Scholarship Foundation. We will gladly help you for free. Again, it's the primary financial aid application, and it opens each year on October 1st. So there's not really much for you to do with the FAFSA until after the school year gets started and we get close till the end of September. But each year on October 1st, you will need to do your FAFSA for the following school year. And so you may just want to set a reminder on your phone. The very first step that you could take, and again, I don't know if you'll be doing this with Wyman at some point over the summer, but if not, you would do it potentially in September, is to create a federal student aid ID. It's a username and password that acts as your electronic signature on the FAFSA and is yours for life once you have it because it's connected to your Social Security number. You, the student, will need one, and if your parent is going to provide their information on your FAFSA, your parent will also need to have an ID as well. Ultimately, the FAFSA is a math calculation. It's a form, right? So FAFSA does not pay for college. FAFSA is a form. And the form is a math calculation that calculates something called an EFC. So the FAFSA looks at student income and assets, parent income and assets, the number of people in the household, and the number of people in the households who are enrolled in college, and it calculates something called an expected family contribution, or an EFC. And that number is really two things. First, it is what the federal government believes that you and your family can contribute for school for one school year. And the truth of the matter is, I know very, very few people who get their EFC and say, yes, that looks like an accurate reflection of my ability to pay. So that's the first piece. But the second piece is that it determines your eligibility for a lot of need-based financial aid. And so as we go into some of the next few slides, we'll talk a little bit about EFC cutoff for some of those programs. And then there is lots of free help out there for filing the FAFSA. So it's important that if you need help, that you recognize there is lots of free help. Alexandria, I don't know if you're in the room still or not. It looks like there's two. I'm going to pause because it looks like there's maybe some questions coming in via the chat.
That was one of our students saying she had to leave for another.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. I just didn't want to move on if there were questions that needed to be answered. So
gotcha.
I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about grant aid. So we're going to start at the top of this circle, which is the federal Pell Grant. So this is the largest federal grant program currently in operation at the federal level. It is a need-based grant that is awarded to students and their students strictly on the grounds of financial need. So as long as the student meets the need qualification, the student would qualify for a Pell Grant. So the maximum grant this coming school year is $6,345. We talked a little bit about EFC. So if I have an EFC of 0 when I file the FAFSA, I'm going to qualify for that full $6,345 Pell Grant. if I have a family contribution that's 4,000, I'm still going to qualify for a Pell Grant, but it's going to be much smaller. It's going to be probably in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 1,700. And if my EFC is like 5,800, I am just above the cutoff to be eligible for a federal Pell Grant, and I would not receive it. Because Pell is a federal grant program, it follows the student. So if you are eligible for a Pell Grant, you should receive it regardless of where you go to school, or for the most part, we have told students for years, regardless of when you file your FAFSA. Honestly, I don't feel comfortable telling you that anymore because I just don't know what's going to happen moving forward. So it is really more than ever important for you to file your FAFSA as soon after October 1st as possible, because in the event that there are limited Pell dollars in the next few years, it will be based off of when a student files their FAFSA. So October 1st is a critical date for you each and every year that you're going to be in school.
Okay, Teresa, you had a question.
Yeah.
Are Pell Grants renewable?
Yes. So in theory, they're renewable. The reason why they would not be is if a family's financial circumstances changed. So because you have to file the FAFSA each year, financial circumstances can and do change for some families. So for example, I'm the oldest of three. And when all three of us were in college, I was eligible for a Pell Grant. But when there was not three of us in college, the math was different. And so those kinds of family factors can impact an EFC. So we see a lot of families who go from, you know, they have two in college and the younger student is eligible for a Pell Grant, but when the older student graduates, the math changes and then they lose that Pell Grant. So it is renewable, but it's not a guaranteed renewal. It depends on the financial circumstances. The final thing I just want to say about a Pell Grant is that it is renewable. It is available to a student for up to 12 semesters, which is 6 years of undergrad. So it's important for you to understand that, because when you look at graduation rates for four-year schools in particular, the graduation rates that they give you are actually based off of 6 years. And so you want to understand what you need to do to be the student who graduates in 6 years or less, because running out of a Pell Grant is difficult. It's difficult to replace those dollars. So we're going to move around the circle clockwise to FSEOG. So this is also a federal grant. Again, all you have to do is file the FAFSA, but there are a couple key differences here. So this one for a very, very long time has been first come, first serve. So that will most certainly not change moving forward. These are very small award allocations at most colleges. So this is a campus-based program. So some colleges have dollars to award and some colleges do not. So it's based off of when you file your FAFSA. It's based off of your expected family contribution. So priority goes to students who are eligible for a federal Pell Grant. And it's based off of how much in SEOG dollars that college has to award. So you could receive 4 financial aid packages and 2 schools could offer it to you and 2 schools may not. And it might be because one of those schools doesn't actually even have SEOG funds to award, for example. The maximum grant for SEOG is $4,000, but it is exceptionally rare to see an award amount that high. They typically range from anywhere between $500 to $1,000 because colleges are trying to spread those dollars to as many students as possible. And again, I do not expect that will change in the next few years. Access Missouri, if you keep moving down. So Access Missouri is the state of Missouri's need-based grant program. It requires that you be a Missouri resident and that you plan to attend an institution in Missouri. So a community college, a 4-year public, or a 4-year private. There is a deadline for applying for Access Missouri. So your FAFSA really needs to be on file by February 1st in order to be guaranteed consideration for these funds. And it's always a little difficult to tell exactly how much the award amounts are going to be. The minimum award is supposed to be $1,500, but it is possible for it to be higher. At least it has been in recent years. Award amounts have been a little bit closer to $1,800, $2,000. when we talked about Pell Grant, we said that an EFC cutoff of about 5,800 would make you, 5,800 or less would make you eligible for a Pell Grant. For Access Missouri, the family contribution cutoff is 12,000. So it's higher, and we do see students who are not eligible for a Pell Grant do qualify for Access Missouri. The final grant program for Missouri students is A+. So A+, you probably all know as much, if not more about it than I do, so I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time here, but I do wanna, so for those of you who maybe don't know, it's a tuition remission program that pays for college credits at the community college. I would highly, highly recommend that when you start, when you go back to your schools in the fall, or when you get connected with your school counselors this fall, the state of Missouri anticipates that they will be making some adjustments to A+ eligibility for this year's high school seniors. They've already started to announce some of those potential modifications. So you may find that you don't necessarily have to meet the same criteria that you were expecting to have to meet, especially as it relates to those service hours. So make sure that you understand if and how those eligibility criteria change moving forward. And then I always like to point out that you are required to file the FAFSA in order to get your A+ dollars. The state of Missouri does have that as an eligibility criteria, and there is a reason for that. So the state of Missouri would like to know if you are eligible for a federal Pell Grant. In the event that you are eligible for a federal Pell Grant, those dollars are going to be applied to your bill at the community college first. And so remember, A+ only covers tuition and fees at the community college. So if my Pell Grant is $6,345, it easily pays for all of my tuition and fees at my local community college, which means I may not actually have my A+ dollars kick in, okay? Is there anyone in the group who's from Illinois? So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Illinois state aid if it's not relevant. But Illinois MAP, just for purposes of the video too, is the state of Missouri, or sorry, the state of Illinois' need-based grant. The FAFSA is required, and historically MAP funds have run out much, much quicker than state-based aid in Missouri. So it would be, again, really critical to make sure your FAFSA is filed as soon after October 1st as possible. All right, so we're gonna talk for a minute on work study. So when you sit down to do your FAFSA in October, you are automatically considered for grant aid, and you are automatically considered for student loans. But there is a question that asks on the FAFSA whether or not you want to be considered for work study, and I would highly advise that you say yes. You can always turn down a work study award later if you don't need it or want it, but if you say no, they're not going to consider you for it. And then you've lost out on that opportunity for a financial aid resource that you may need or want. But essentially, work study allows you to have an on-campus job. And so unlike a grant or a loan that is used to pay your bill directly, those dollars come to you in the form of a paycheck, and you can use those funds for, you know, rent or groceries or other incidental expenses that you may have as a student. Okay, so we're going to talk about student loans. When you get the link to the workbook that I'll be sure to share with Alexandria, there will be a lot more detail about the loans than what you'll see here on the PowerPoint. But when you get that page, you'll see that the loans are kind of broken up into good or better loans, or loans that you may want to limit or avoid if at all possible. And so what I'd like to do is really walk you through the three sort of guidelines that we use to determine if a loan is good or better versus maybe not so good. So the first guideline is federal versus private. So by and large, any student loan that is backed by the federal government is going to be better than what you would secure from a private bank or any other private student lender. And there are a couple reasons for this. So the first is students. The federal loans in your name are basically issued in good faith, that you're going to go to school and graduate and repay them. Private lenders are not going to issue you loans without a credit check. So you will have to either pass a credit check, or you would need to have a cosigner sign with you. And so that's just one of the considerations. the interest rates are almost always lower on federal loans than they are on private loans. So for example, going into this coming school year, they've gone down considerably and they're at 2.75%. And there's just no guarantee that you would secure anywhere near as low an interest rate on a private loan. And then the biggest reason to be wary of the private loans and to prioritize federal loans would really be around the protections that are involved when it comes to repayment. So there are significant repayment terms and conditions, protections in place on federal loans that don't exist on private loans. And so an example that I use that is really kind of awful and terrible to think about is essentially what happens in the event that something happens to the student. In the case of a federal loan, those loans are forgiven or canceled in the event that a student passes away, but that is not always the case on a private loan. So there are private loans that would require the cosigner to assume full responsibility and repay it. And in other events, if something happens to the cosigner, there are circumstances where students have gone into automatic default. So the bottom line on that, I think, is if you're looking at all at private loans, read the terms and conditions very, very carefully. So the second is student versus parent. And so I know we've got students on this call. The loans that are made to you are better than anything that's going to be offered to your parent. So there is a loan that is offered to parents called the PLUS loan. It's the parent loan for undergraduate students. Your parents, so it is a federal loan, but your parent would have to pass a credit check. The interest rate on the parent loan is higher than what it is on the student loan. So this year it's 5.3, but it is capped at 10.5. So it's a pretty substantial interest rate on that loan. And one of the reasons why we are wary is because the loan can go up to the cost of a school minus other financial aid offered. So a real life example, we had a student a couple years ago whose parent was offered a parent loan for $40,000 for one school year. $40,000 for 1 year, let alone 4 or 5, is significant. And so we would just urge extra caution around those parent loans. The final guideline that we use is subsidized versus unsubsidized. And so at this point, this really refers primarily to the loans made to you, the student, through the federal government. There's what's called a subsidized Stafford and an unsubsidized Stafford. The subsidized Stafford is the better borrowing option because the federal government pays the interest for you while you're in school, as well as during any periods of deferment or your grace, which is the period of time between when you leave school and enter repayment. So in short, you are only responsible for the interest on the subsidized Stafford that accrues while you are actively in repayment. On the unsubsidized Stafford, interest begins to accrue immediately and you are responsible for all of it from the very beginning. All right. So I'm working to be mindful of time, and this is this is the math about how colleges determine financial need. So the calculation is going to look the same regardless of what school we're talking about. It's just that the numbers are going to be different. So each school starts with something called the cost of attendance, and the cost of attendance is what they believe you will need to pay to come to their school for one school year. Cost of attendance usually includes direct costs, and direct costs would be tuition and fees, room and board if you're living on campus, and then it also includes indirect costs. And so indirect costs would be books and supplies, transportation expenses, personal expenses for personal items, and so all of that together makes up a full cost of attendance. You have a lot more control over the indirect expenses. So it's worth keeping that in mind as you're making a decision, because you have more control over those costs. If you decide to go to a school, you don't have much choice over the tuition and fees once you've made that decision. They're gonna subtract the expected family contribution, which again is that number that is calculated by the FAFSA. And so once they've subtracted that, that is your need. That's how much they need to help you come up with in order for you to afford to come to their school for 1 year. They're going to give you then all of the gift aid or the free money that you are eligible for. So it could be federal, state grant aid, institutional scholarships, but anything that does not need to be repaid is going to be offered. And then what's left over is unmet need, and unmet need is covered all or in part by student loans. So let's put some, real numbers to this. This is actually an example, but this is pretty close to the cost of attendance at Mizzou these days. So in this example, my cost of attendance is $29,100. That's what my school estimates is all in. Tuition, fees, books, supplies, transportation, living expenses, everything that I need to cover as a student for 1 year. My expected family contribution, as it was calculated by the FAFSA, was $4,416. So that's what my family and I are believed to be able to contribute towards the cost of my education for the school year. And then I've been offered $12,284 in grant aid. So that could be a small federal Pell Grant, it could be Access Missouri, and it may also include either outside or institutional grants and scholarships that I've been offered. And if I look just at that grant amount, I might be tempted to think, okay, $12,000, that feels like a lot of money. But my unmet need is still $12,400. And just to be candid, that assumes I can pay the $4,416 EFC, because if I can't, I'm really trying to come up with closer to $17,000 to cover the cost of this education. And so filling that gap is not as easy as it may seem. And maybe it doesn't seem easy, but it's definitely not easy. So the subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loans that are available to you, the student. So the subsidized Stafford, you would be eligible for $3,500 as a first-year student, $4,500 as a sophomore, and $5,500 as a junior and beyond. Your lifetime limit is $23,000, which you would hit in about your 5th year of undergrad if it took you more than 4 years to earn a bachelor's degree. The unsubsidized Stafford, so you'll see behind those dollar amounts, there's a D and an I. The D stands for dependent and the I stands for independent. So dependent students are students who are required to provide parent information on their FAFSA. Independent students are students who are not. The vast majority of high school seniors are dependent. In order to be independent, a student has to meet one of the following criteria. They have to be 24 years of age, have already earned a bachelor's degree and be working on a graduate degree, be married, have a child of their own that they provide more than 50% of the financial support for, be emancipated, in court-ordered legal guardianship, in foster care or a ward of the court or the state, a veteran or on active duty military, or be classified as unaccompanied and at risk of being homeless by either their school district, a transitional living program, or a shelter. So again, you only have to meet one of those criteria, but if you meet one of those criteria, a student would be considered independent. So dependent students are eligible for $2,000 in unsubsidized Stafford per year. Independent students or students whose parents have gone through the credit check for that parent loan and been denied are eligible for $6,000 in their first and second year of college, $7,000 in their junior and senior year. Their lifetime limits on those are $31,000 and $57,000 respectively, and both of those numbers include the $23,000 subsidized Stafford. So I guess like best or worst case scenario, depending on your perspective, $57,000 is the most you can borrow as an undergraduate from the federal government. We haven't talked a lot about the Scholarship Foundation. We do offer interest-free, fee-free student loans as well as grants to students from the St. Louis metro area and in some cases beyond. Those loans are good for up to $11,000 per year, and our lifetime limit is $55,000. And the only reason those numbers are as high as they are is because it's our intention to help students avoid entirely borrowing federal loans, not necessarily to supplement them. All right.
I had a quick question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the other session are we staying in breakout sessions until the end of the Zoom, or are we gonna come back together?
I hadn't planned to come back together, but I think that's also up to you if you'd like the whole group to come back together.
Yeah, I'd like to come back together. I think the other group is almost done. So
okay, I can wrap up here. Tell me how many minutes I've got and I will make it work.
Okay, I don't know when the breakout is gonna close, but you can keep going. I just want to check in with the other group, but they were asking if we were gonna come back together.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
So there's some information here about staying organized. You can read all of this. The one thing I will just highlight is the importance of accessing your school portals and college emails. As you start receiving acceptances, colleges will start sending really important information to those accounts. So once you've been accepted, create those access points and check them every other week, once a week, whatever is a frequency that you feel comfortable with, to be sure that you're not missing any important communications. Quickly on implementing a successful scholarship search. So really it's important to start with the colleges that you're applying to first. Find out if they award scholarships through a priority admissions deadline or a separate application. Some schools do it both ways, and just be sure you're meeting any and all deadlines. Then you would want to research local opportunities, because again, by applying at your colleges first and the local opportunities, you are shrinking the pool of competition essentially, increasing the likelihood that you're going to earn those awards. So myscholarshipcentral.org is a great local resource, and I'm sure you will hear about it a lot from Wyman in the coming months. That would probably be on your to-do list starting in early September. And then move on to those national options. So there are certainly national scholarship opportunities that have their place, but you're competing against, again, every single other high school senior all across the country who's also trying to figure this thing out. And so condensing those opportunities to local and the colleges that you're applying to will just increase the likelihood that you might earn the awards. A few helpful hints: apply early, make sure that you meet your deadlines, apply to more than one school so that you've got options and multiple places to choose from. Don't rule out private colleges. Yes, they are expensive, but they do oftentimes have more money to give, and so sometimes that can bring the cost down. That being said, in light of the current circumstances, we are aware that private colleges may be more at risk in the long term financially. So I would really advise that if you don't look at only private schools, look at the private schools that interest you, and maybe include at least one public school on your list, and probably the community college as well, as we are just unsure how long things are going to be impacted by the global health concern that has resulted from the pandemic.
Okay, so yep. I had us coming back together at 1:55, so I think the other group is done.
Okay, cool.
All right.
I'm gonna leave the information about the Scholarship Foundation because there will be other opportunities. This is our student advising team. So you met Felipe and Robert in the initial breakout. Dominisha and Amanda are also advisors that you may have the opportunity to connect with in the coming months. And then if you need anything, so we'll be in contact with you likely throughout the summer as Wyman taps us to, but we would certainly welcome having you reach out to us. So you can call or email us. And if you'd like to be connected directly with an advisor, fill out that intake form and we will follow up with you to schedule a call and see what we can do to support you. So I'm going to leave it there.